see by everyone. And when you're called to stand and tell just what you saw in me, more than anything I know, I want you once to be. She got her father's eyes, her father's eyes, eyes that find the good in things when good is not around, eyes that find the source of help when help just can't be found, eyes full of compassion, seeing every pain, knowing what you're going through and feeling it the same. Just like my father's eyes, my father's eyes, my father's eyes, just like my father's eyes. Everyone's back.
Okay, guys.
Yeah, we'll get it from here now. Yeah. Randy!
What a very special, wonderful blessing from our precious Hannah. How'd you think that? Oh, that was good. You may have noticed it already that something different is about to happen. A little bit different. Well, maybe a lot different, actually. We're going to do something this morning. Every Saturday morning, a small group of men get together. A small group of men get together in the pastor's office we talk about things. We discuss scriptural matters and how they apply to us as we serve you and others, our beloved congregation, and so that we can do a better job. And we need to understand more, and so the discussion flows really pretty freely. Sometimes Pastor has to rein us in a little, but we sometimes, in that process, we discover some very meaningful principles that we can apply and use in our contact with others, and hopefully improve those contacts for the sake of our Lord and Savior. So, also, we're going to discuss kind of an often challenging topic, and that is the relationships between fathers and sons. So, we welcome you to peek into Saturday Morning Live. Where am I supposed to?
The hardest one to do.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, live from the South Aberdeen Theological Institute, SATI for short. Turn this up just a little bit. We don't normally have mics during Saturday morning, but we're just a small group here.
Wait, yeah, the challenge is to ignore these people and get on with our conversation. Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, you brought up the idea of reading with Job, the reading with Job, and I didn't think I've ever thought about that, reading about Job in terms of a father issue. But tell us a little bit of something about why you thought of that.
Part of the thing about Job is that there's good things and bad things that happen in families, and we don't all have I don't know, the idea about fathers being there's this wonderful relationship between fathers and sons and all those things. There's not always those kinds of relationships. And Job had it seems that he had a good relationship with the kid, but at the same time, he during those parties that the boys had, and he had 7 sons, so they had 7 parties throughout the year, and they invited their friends and stuff. And as Marty was reading, that Job would go out and he would have sacrifices. He would make sacrifices for his kids in case they sinned. Kind of like, you wonder about that. So there's the good and the bad in all these relationships, fathers and sons and grandfathers, and all those kinds of things kind of roll into to one. And everyone knows this, the end of the story. At the end, that of course Job had twice as much as he had before. And that's usually what gets depressed. But there was one verse at the very end that perplexed me. It says, "And they all got together, his friends and his family, and they comforted Job." And I'm like, what? I thought he had twice as much. He was a happy guy and all that. Yeah, but think of all the things that he lost. He had lost family. He had lost friends, and all that turmoil, And years later, he still had to be comforted over all that had happened to him. And so, family relationships is not always an easy thing to work through.
Huh?
Yeah.
That's a fact.
Yeah, it's not always easy, yeah. And trying to think of the word for the picture perfect family. Almost, there are those families that are wonderful, and they have wonderful relationship between dad and the son and all that sort of goes generation after generation. But there's a lot of them that don't. That have very troubled relationships between the family members, and even when things turn out fine or not, still there is a lot of sorrow that even goes in even years later on for things that happened that they may have even been resolved, but they come up again and again.
You mean the word bittersweet?
Yeah,
I say that because you're not getting a true flavor of our group, because we interrupt each other quite a bit.
Yeah. Me more than in general, I'll interrupt you.
So bittersweet is a good word for that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Because you normally think like on Father's Day or birthdays or stuff like that, or holidays, those are supposed to be special occasions. And for a lot of people, they're not special occasions. There's something to be kind of like regretted, because it's just not what you would expect.
Is there anybody here whose father is still alive?
Heavenly Father, my Heavenly Father's still alive.
That's what we really count on. But do you ever wonder, there's something you wish you could fix with your father? And now you can.
Now, my son has mentioned to me, and it's almost like robotic, what's this all about? He has apologized to me for being a brat kid at times. And I'm thinking, that kind of comes with growing up. Because I remember when I was a teenager, and I gave my dad problems. Huh?
I do too.
Yeah. It's a long time ago.
I probably learned the things I got.
Yeah.
But my dad loved me. He had different ways. Probably it was by faith I knew he loved me. He didn't express it very often, very well. But because of my faith, I understood that he loved me, because God gave me a father. Okay. But the result was I realized that I'd been rebellious on my teen years, and I felt bad about that.
No.
Yeah. Well, you don't remember. We'll stop it right there. And my son, when he was turning around and we're just having a lighthearted discussion, a couple things came up and this stuff came out. It wasn't emotional, it wasn't tearful. He said, Dad, yeah, I did this, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, it's all about growing, moving forward. That is my hope, so.
That's pretty good. I like that. I'll hold on to that one. I like that one. David, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your father.
Well, I have very few recollections of him. My early years, mainly because I was born with a condition that's called Apert syndrome, which means that about three months before I was actually born, one of the genes in my body that was trying to determine the skeleton told some of the cells that, hey, you guys need to produce more calcium. So they did. So when I was born, my fingers are fused together, like that. My toes are fused together. Some of the sutures in my skull were fused together. Some of the other joints were fused together, and the poor people at the Shelton Hospital didn't know what to do about it. So they said, well, there's this children's orthopedic hospital in Seattle. So they sent me up there, spent the first 4 years of my life up there. Actually, when they weren't operating at Children's Orthopedic, they sent me over to Rainier. Anyway, so I came home, well, at age 4, I had a vocabulary of 2 words, David and Potty. You know, you can do a lot of conversation with that. So the doctors apparently were thinking, well, maybe he's not quite with it mentally. So they were wanting to keep me up there and keep me in here. But my parents, who had been coming up periodically to see me and to bring new clothes and all that, saw the way that I responded when I got new clothes. Kind of like to show them off, you know. Anyway, so the parents persuaded the doctors and staff to send me home. So I got to go home for a short while. And then I was in and out of Children's Orthopedic Hospital until I was 16 years old, and making the trips from Shelton to Seattle back in the early 50s. You know, the freeway wasn't quite as nice as it is now. So I'm sure, and my dad, who owned a service station, this is one where they did the full service. Anybody remember those? When they came out?
Check the oil, check the air in the tire, check the water radiator.
Not only that, but he went a step further, and if some customer came in that didn't have money, didn't have a credit card, he'd let them charge gas.
Whoa.
Anyway, so my dad would take me up to Children's Orthopedic whenever I needed an operation or checkups, and there's always checkups. And then once I got my vocabulary up and I attended school and all that, around 5th or 6th grade, he took my brother and I on hikes up to like Flapjack Lakes, High Divide, you know, all over the place, which would be usually several days, and it'd be camping out and all that.
With all of that joint rebuilding and all of that kind of stuff, you were able to do those hikes?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I was a little slower, but
Slow's all right.
and then it was also stopped, I think it's 5th grade Sunday school class, and he had retired from the military, had been in World War II, and so apparently he had a connection with Fort Lewis. And every year he would take a group of us from the church up to Fort Lewis. We'd get to climb all over the tanks and other vehicles, and then they would demonstrate their flamethrowers, and they'd have rockets or something. I don't know how far, anyway, behind the grandstands, I would shoot rockets over the grandstand and hit targets in the field. Anyway, it was a lot of fun. Anyway, so yeah, we had a good relationship. And then when I was in high school, he brought some of those slips from people charging gas every month. And he said, well, Dave, since you probably would have a hard time working at the station, I'll give you these slips. Here's a book that has all the customers' names on it. You can record in the book all of the various charges that day, and then my mom and dad would, at the end of the month, do all the bills and send them off to the, anyway, the people.
That kind of sets your life for the rest for the
That kind of
book
explains a
work.
lot.
Yeah.
And the rest is history.
Well, you know, I'm interested also in the bookkeeping part of it. Did you ever do anything else with that?
Yeah, computer, so I couldn't.
Yeah, it seems to me that you learned something there that you've been applying all the rest of the time. I know the church has surely benefited from what you've learned. Yeah.
I did inherit one thing from him, though.
Which is?
Well, whenever my dad would come home, he'd sit on the couch or the chair, and next thing,
Yeah.
A good snore, huh?
and I find that if I'm trying to watch TV, if the cat's in my lap, or even if the cat isn't in my lap, anyway, I presume.
Yeah, that's one of those things about growing up. You don't always appreciate it, but a lot of times you end up growing up to be somewhat like your parents, which is almost like, oh no, you turned into your dad. Oh,
Yeah, that's what your mother tells you.
yeah. You're just like your dad.
Just like your dad. Yeah, praise the Lord. Randy, tell us a little bit something about your dad, and then I'll tell you
Okay,
about
well, I
mine.
kind of interjected there a little bit. My dad, I'll tell you something about my dad. He was a mill worker most of his life as I was growing up. And yeah, I'll go with that. And he also was hired by the city of Hoquiam and was the manager, superintendent at Sunset Memorial Park for a number of years. And so I got some good, interesting jokes from him. Puns. You know, people are dying to get up there.
They're raining jokes.
One of the, I'm just, you know, I'll get into his mind for me and tell you about the time that the Hells Angels had a state patrol escort coming down the freeway so they could bury one of their cohorts up at a memorial's Hoquiam cemetery. And my dad and the co-worker were the only ones out near the plot to get ready to bury the person that was deceased. But the state patrol, the city police were up in the hill with guns trained on the Hells Angels while the group was all burying their friend. And when they were done there, whatever they did, their last rites, they were throwing guns and chains and whatever they had, all their weapons, they were tossing them into the grave. And you know, he and his buddy were the only ones that were totally unarmed, incapable of doing anything, but they were the ones that had to do the work. Well, that was one of his highlights. My dad took us all fishing. One of his favorite things was fishing on the Hoquiam River. We all learned to fish with my dad. That was probably the most, I would say, the most endearing experience I had with my dad. And so like I say, I understood that he loved me. Us kids, we believed it.
That's
that,
kind of important.
I would say
you
that
believe it even if it isn't said.
it isn't expressed often in many ways, and he had a very hard upbringing that I don't, sometimes share with you. But I'm thankful because still I have that imprint based on faith. And I think my mom, I'll have to say, I attribute my mom for being sort of the go-between. She didn't ever diss him, but she, kind of worked things out.
That seems to be a feature of dads. We somehow know they love us, but they haven't said it.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's how we've been as fathers sometimes, and I think back, I wonder if I've said it often enough to my children. My mother ended up getting a male child when she had expected something else. And
We feel for you.
yeah,
There's only two kinds, so
Yeah.
you know,
Well, not
she told me one time, he said, you know, in my day, when you bought a new toaster, you turn it over and all the directions were on the bottom. You know what's coming next, right?
There were no instructions on the bottom.
So I was raised by that infamous book, The Dr. Spock, and she really pressed it upon my father to follow the rules. And so there was this kind of a distant relationship. He made the rules and I was to follow them and didn't go any farther than that. And I think it hurt him a lot. On faith, I knew he loved me.
Yeah.
You know, that was just the way it was. But I can't recall ever my pop saying, hey, you did a good job. Or I can't recall ever doing something for him and not having it criticized either. So again, that's according to the book. I don't think he wanted to live it that way. And I sure did. But the way I feel. But I want to tell you a good story about my pop that I think, you know, you guys would probably appreciate, and maybe you want to tell it to your kids sometimes because it applies to something. And I told it often, but in the freight business, we had a farm, and my pop also worked in the freight business. And one evening, I drove the truck for him a lot. And one evening, we were getting ready, we were out on the dock, we were closing the doors, and my pop said, come over here. So I went over there. I was about 16 at the time. I hadn't been driving very long, but he said, see those rigs out there in the yard? There were 5 diesel semis sitting out in the yard just chugging away, waiting. And the drivers were in the office filling out their log. He said, this is the greatest adventure a man can have. This is one of my father's very few times when he actually used words to try to teach me something. Most of the time what he did was something broke on the farm, he'd say, fix it, and then he'd walk away and go do something else. But this time he was talking to me. This is the greatest adventure a man can have. How so? I'm tired, I'm dirty, my legs, my arms hurt from unloading freight. It didn't seem like it to me. But he said, you see those rigs out there? Tomorrow morning they're going to be in Seattle. We were in Spokane at the time. Tomorrow morning they're going to be in Seattle. They're going to unload a bunch of freight. And all that stuff's going to be delivered. And it's going to make people's lives better. Going to make them happy. The store's going to be happy. They've got stuff to sell. The people who have the stuff, they're going to be happy because it's something they wanted and they were able to get it, have it delivered to them. So that everything that you do here and that we do here is a service to other people. Now, if you think about that and you apply that to your life in terms of your work or whatever you do, let it be a service to other people. That's the thing he taught me. And I can think of maybe 2 or 3 other things that he actually used words to teach me. That's enough. But it was a difficult relationship at best. And
but it left a mark. I mean, we're all talking about how the things our fathers did left an impression, whether we wanted it to or realized it when we were young. I mean,
Yeah, and I think most of
I didn't want to interrupt.
no, and one of the just like Mark. I think one of the things that I think marks our parents is they came out of World War II, and it was a much different world than what we live in today. Much different world. My dad came from, he was in the Italian army, and so he spent a couple years in India until the war ended, courtesy of the British government. And so, the world was so much different than it is today, and the parenting skills that many had, even though they were believing Christians, still had things that could have been better, could have been done better. But the world that they grew up in, they were survivors, and so they did things. Workaholics, all that kind of stuff that they did because of the culture or just the world that they grew up in, and so it was a hard world, and that's just part of how it came across.
Well, you mentioned too that they have gone through World War II.
Yeah.
But think about it, for some of our fathers, they'd also just gotten through the Depression.
Yeah.
They grew up in the Depression, and as a reward for surviving that,
Hard work.
they get to go to
World War II.
World War II.
Yeah.
And so that surely must have shaped the way in which they dealt with us. And whether they went to war or whether they were at home, they were affected by everything that happens. And so maybe it's up to us to demonstrate what we think we would like a father to be as we are. No, it's not too late.
Well, we can be
show
different.
people.
We can be the same, but we can be different in the sense that we're not tied to the past. We can make changes to the way, even if we were brought up in homes that were not wonderful. It doesn't matter. You can still be you can still be wonderful now. I dearly love the grandson, because that kind of gives you insight back into, when you were growing up, and 6-year-old, what insight you can get from a 6-year-old. Wow.
Grandchildren tell you that by their being a part of our lives, I think that's telling us that we're forgiven for not being perfect as fathers ourselves.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
That's very special. Randy, you got something you want to close us off with? The time's getting short.
Well, it's interesting because we did give some forethought to this group, but I'm wondering, I know many of you would like to share some things about your dads, if we maybe had time, but I know that Proverbs, and Mike mentioned this yesterday, there are some Proverbs that talk about fathers and sons. So I'm going to read Proverbs 20, verse 7. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm going to read Proverbs 20, verse 7. And this kind of sets the stage for my impression of what dads are, fathers. When gals become mothers, they just move right into it, right? It's automatic. They just step right into it. Now, I realize that mothers have to be there in your history to show you how to do this or do that. When guys become fathers, and I don't know there's a guy that wouldn't raise their hand, it's utter shock.
Where's the instructions for this?
So it is a shock to our system. And it might be a little bit about we didn't have good modeling. I don't think so. I think it's still shock. So you see guys will either one of two things, right? Abandon, run away, or overbearing. That's the way us guys will respond. And God can give us that middle ground, that wisdom to take the right choice. And so guys have a different perspective on parenting. And verse 7 says, "The righteous man walks in his integrity." There's a lot of things we can walk in. We can walk in our success stories. We can walk in sorrow. We can walk in a lot of things. But the righteous man walks in his integrity. His children are blessed after him. We don't necessarily get to see the results of the impact that we want to have right there and then. It doesn't happen automatically for us. I believe God's put an impression on guys that makes me either want to fight or flight, right? Fight or flight. So we're looking to the future. We're trying to build into our kids something more than the here and now. The last verse, and I'm sorry I'm starting to preach here.
Do it. Go.
The other verse, so I thought about, there's a difference between bearing children and begetting children. Begetting is about, it's not just something that happens one time. It's about producing, moving forward. And in 1 Peter, verse 1, or chapter 1, this gives me encouragement. I mean, if God has done this for us, or has this process going on, then it makes sense. And I've got to find it first. 1 Peter is after Hebrews,
New Testament,
and it's before 1 John, I think. Yes, 1 Peter 1. Thanks for wanting to, man. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled, and that fades not away, reserved in heaven for you. When you're given kids, children, I suppose especially a son, you look for their future. You're hoping and trusting because you know Jesus Christ, that there are good things ahead. But you also know that there's suffering in between. And us guys, in fact, I told my mom, I apologize, but I enjoy watching my kids suffer sometimes. And she...
Yeah, well...
it's not a sadistic suffering. Now if I have to intervene, yes. But there were many times where she wanted to rescue them, and probably should have been. And I figured, they had to learn through their suffering. And that's the way us guys are. Sometimes. And if we do it right, it turns out right. It doesn't mean we break people or whatever. But there was just a difference. And I see here where, because of the suffering that Jesus Christ went through us, we're able to have that victory at the end. And we have confidence. And, so I see where we have that perspective and we share it together as a church. And that gives us hope. So I don't know. Like it. They don't turn around very far.
It's odd that you said that the father would sometimes let his child suffer. Because when I was looking for sayings for the bulletin, one of them said, a dad will, when he tosses his kid up in the air or whatever, and it does something, that his first instinct is to catch him, and then he realizes that he might learn something if he... Well, I don't think it was tossing. It was something to the effect that he could have rescued the kid from some sort of trouble,
Well,
But he let him suffer the,
probably maybe not letting him suffer so much, but giving him the opportunity to learn from the experience. If your kid starts to decide to climb the tree out in the yard, mom's going to run get him. Dad's going to say, no, you have to learn to climb the tree. And it's not because they necessarily... It's not because it was what?
And then try to get down.
And then try to get down, right?
Well, not to climb the tree.
You got to learn, and it's not because you want them to suffer at all, it's just that they have to learn about these things, and that seems to be the dad's role, to do that. And that's not fun, but it's what you do.
Oh, that was
You didn't know it wasn't
I didn't
fun.
know that.
There's a neat reason for the madness.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank all of you for your patience as you listen in on a special edition of Saturday Morning Live.
We got one. Whoa.
That's another thing.
That's another thing. We got one song to sing. I think it's